Good evening, everyone. If I can just ask you to please make sure your cell phones are on silent, but feel free to take my picture. Well, here we are, the CAEF Advocate Award of Excellence, October 15th. Good evening and welcome. I am Anita Bromberg, President of Canadian Antisemitism Education Foundation, and whoa. And on behalf of our board, many of whom are here tonight, and I hope you had a chance to meet them, I want to thank you all for being here. Of course, special thanks to our many, many sponsors that made this evening possible. And it's also my pleasure to take a moment to thank the committee that worked so hard to organize tonight's program. Carrie Katz, she chaired the committee and she's also a board member, along with Judith Benatar, Rose Baum, and of course, our executive director, who we couldn't do without, Andria Spindel. So we're gathered here to honor Mr. Rob Roberts, Editor-in-Chief of the National Post, and taking us through this evening's program is our MC, Patricia Bebia Mawa. She's a woman I've known and admired for many years, so it's my extreme pleasure to introduce her to you tonight. Patricia is the President and CEO of Diamond Plus Media, Executive Vice President of Afro Global Television, and host of Planet Africa. She has directed and produced over 15 TV programs. She's the writer and director of the drama series Omo Bella Palace and a feature film, The Life Coach, which won the Audience Choice at the CTFF. As Associate Publisher of Excellence in Vision and Destiny magazines, she co-led the Discover magazine series, which has released over 20 titles for various countries and organizations. In 2016, Patricia co-launched Afro Global Television, a 24-hour channel on all major cable platforms in Canada. I'm going to ask Patricia to come out now, and I just want to note that she, with her husband, Moses Mawa, are founders of diversity initiatives that are very important, including the Transformation Institute for Leadership and Innovation. Here is Patricia to lead us.
Thank you so much, Anita. Anita is the reason I'm here. She's like pulled me by force to be here, but I'm just joking. Anita and I, we've done a lot together, a lot of great work, advocating for displaced people, making PSAs about anti-Black racism, anti-Islamic, Islamophobia, and all kinds of discriminations in Canada. So Anita, thank you for the great work that we've done together over the years. You're a true leader, and I truly appreciate and respect you. So how's everyone doing? How's everyone doing? It's not winter yet. Yeah, so I'm going to put on my glasses now. Today I made sure I didn't wear false lashes so they can fit well. So, well, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today to MC this prestigious event. As a journalist who comes from a community that has often been portrayed unfairly in the media, I deeply understand the power of narratives and how, that can actually affect. And when I first arrived in Canada in 2000, I noticed that most of what was portrayed about the Black community on television or in the media was, war, crime, and poverty. And even when the positive stories were highlighted, they always had a tinge of negativity. For instance, a few years ago when Michael Jean became Governor General, one of the headlines said, "From the ghettos of Port-au-Prince to Parliament Hill." I was like, what? She just became Governor General. What's the ghetto thing doing in the headlines? But such framing, often diminishes the achievements of individuals and reinforces harmful stereotypes. This is what has strengthened my resolve as a journalist to continue to do the work that I do with integrity. The impact of biased narratives goes beyond words. It can influence employment, social integration, and lead to discrimination, stigma, and even hate. That's why the role that the media plays is more important now than ever before. It's not about choosing sides, but upholding the truth, integrity, and balance. And as journalists, our duty is to present facts and allow the audience to make their choices and to take their sides. So today, we're here to honor a leader who has guided editorial work at the National Post with a commitment to these principles. This event today is not about taking sides in complex issues, but rather celebrating the importance of truth and accuracy in journalism, even when it is challenging, like now. The Canadian Antisemitism Education Foundation has consistently brought people of all grades, diverse backgrounds together to educate and foster understanding, promote dialogue that transcends boundaries. So now it is my pleasure to introduce a very wonderful woman. She's the Executive Director of the Canadian Antisemitism Education Foundation. Please put your hands together. Warmly welcome Andria Spindel.
So I want to start by saying I'm a volunteer executive director, and I say that because volunteerism is so very important, and I want to thank the wonderful volunteers who welcomed you and assisted us in putting this program together. And I'm happy to hear from any of you that want to do more volunteerism. I never dreamed that I would be fighting for Israel and the Jewish people almost 24/7 when I retired in 2018. Levels of anti-Semitism have increased every year since then, and after October 7th, they skyrocketed. You will hear tonight how one media company has conveyed truth, upheld journalistic standards, challenged heresy, narratives, and lies about Israel, anti-Semitism, and the Jewish people. CAEF, or CAEF as some refer to us, has been sounding the alarm for 2 decades, bringing forth speakers and organizing interfaith events when anti-Semitism was not yet even being taken seriously by the Jewish community, let alone the wider community in Canada. Since 2019, we have initiated a weekly electronic bulletin, regular webinars, research into anti-Semitism in universities' social work curricula across Canada, funded research into the impact of anti-Semitism on faculty, contributed recently to the first Indigenous Embassy Jerusalem's Academic Symposium in Israel. It takes place October 29th. We've partnered with over 30 organizations, both Jewish and non-Jewish, to bring forward programs and events, rallies, vigils, demonstrations in support of Israel and the hostages in Gaza. Our focus is fighting anti-Zionism, which is anti-Semitism. It has become critical since last October that all Jews and our growing number of allies stand firm, stand proud to be Zionists and to defend Israel, the IDF, and the courageous people who love and live in Israel. Since October, the news media in print and broadcast, traditional and social media, have by and large ignored or distorted the truth, Jewish history, and the Israeli war against terrorism. By ignoring the facts and promoting conspiracy theories or repeating the lies the terrorists themselves produce, they have inspired Jew hatred here and across North America, Europe, and beyond. The media, some media, are fueling anti-Semitism. Tonight, we will hear how one person taking a moral stance, investigating facts, and repeatedly delivering quality reporting is displaying courage and tenacity, characteristics needed in the battle for truth to win the hearts and minds of Canadians. CAEF and the entire Jewish community acknowledges the management, ownership, directorship, and all the contributing staff of the National Post in supporting Roberts and justice for Jews.
Thank you, Andrea. Now we're moving on. So next, we're just going to bring up a video that will tell us a little bit about the work of the man we're here to honor. I mean, we have said it earlier that the media does not all the time, most times do not report, what is happening with fact and truth. And many do not do this either because of ignorance, failure to research facts, postmodernist views laden with bias against Jews, or catering to a management that expects particular perspectives to be reflected in reporting on the Middle East. One major exception to this biased reporting is found daily in the National Post. Do you agree? So tonight we're here to celebrate an extraordinary commitment by a man who continues to ensure that, as editor-in-chief of the National Post, that he's dedicated to telling the truth about Israel and all other people. Now, I'd like us to watch a short video about the National Post's contribution to covering Israel and anti-Semitism in Canada. So I'd like to, invite you to take a look at the screen. Another round of applause. It is now my esteemed honor and pleasure to introduce the founder of the National Post, Conrad Black. Conrad is a man of distinction as a historian, journalist, commentator, entrepreneur, and visionary, and a true friend of the Jewish people. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Mr. Conrad Black.
Thank you all very much. And thank all of you with whom I had the opportunity to speak in the lobby before we came in here. Many I'd seen before, many for not some years. But it's a very warm feeling, and without over-egging the pudding or competing with my friend and colleague Roberts in expressing solidarity with you, if I may say it without presuming, and speaking also as the former owner of the Jerusalem Post, which we wrested out of the hands of well-meaning but naive advocates of peace now. It is an honor to be associated in any way with the immensely successful and absolutely historically necessary project of giving the historic Jewish people part of the land of Israel where they have lived in some numbers for over 5,000 years, more than 3,000 years before the birth of the prophet, and creating out of a country that I allegedly was described when he became its Roman governor by Pontius Pilate as a land of sand, camels, and Jehovah, and turning it into the great country it is now with a standard of living almost equal to Canada's. It's an astonishing feat, and as cant and emotionalism subside, and they will subside eventually, will be recognized by everybody. I've been asked to say something about why we started the National Post. Most of you are of an age to remember what things were like before the National Post existed. We had an absolute monotone of conventional media wisdom. All the influence resided with the CBC, the Globe and Mail, and the Toronto Star, with a little bit as if from a sort of yapping dog following behind Maclean's magazine. Apart from my wife's column in it, which was always reliable. And because our company owned the majority of the newspapers, daily newspapers in the country, in the entire country, we were criticized for media monopoly when in fact no media outlet had any influence in this country outside its immediate area and in municipal or provincial matters only, apart from those that I have mentioned. So I thought this would be a wise corporate move, but that Canada desperately needed an alternative to this ghastly, reflexive, boring, soft left monotone. The fact that the Globe and Mail changed publishers twice and editors 3 times in 1 year indicated we had some impact. And it raised its game, it must be said. And as people from the press gallery in Ottawa told me, it was all changed. All of a sudden there was another view. And we did it not in a reactionary way, but in an exploratory way, and in a great range of fields. I remember Ken White was the founding editor, and he engaged a couple of people to dress up in shabby clothes and go out and masquerade as homeless people. And you know, we had, like anyone else, sympathy for homeless people, but there was a suspicion that some of them were charlatans, and some of them were, and we published this. Now, it scandalized and outraged a number of people, but in fact, it was nothing but the truth, and we substantiated it. And there were ways to redesign the welfare system to leave the charlatans out of it. We weren't trying to starve anyone to death. We just objected to people masquerading as poor people because they were too lazy to earn their income any other way. And it went right up the socioeconomic chain to Jean Chrétien. I mean, the reason he meddled in all that nonsense about my becoming a peer and misled the Queen's chief secretary and so on was, as he acknowledged himself privately, that he didn't appreciate what we wrote about his relations with that golf course and the real estate in his district in Shawinigan, if you recall it, which were completely, what we said, completely substantiated by the Royal Commission when it was set up. Look, Jean Chrétien has, I mean, I'm not his greatest admirer, but he has his moments. He's a courageous Federalist. He's in his 90s now, and I saw him at Brian Mulroney's funeral a few weeks ago, and I wish him well. But what he was doing was outrageous. I mean, as scandals go, it wasn't that big a scandal, but he wasn't telling the truth. And you know, what are newspapers and other media outlets for other than to hold high office holders to account like anybody else? Obviously, I don't have the time, and I wouldn't inflict it upon you anyway, even if I did, to recount too many of these things. But we were trying to be, and I believe we were, and Roberts was a part of it from the start, from the first day, an alternative, not a reactionary alternative, but a reflective alternative, to show another view but do it responsibly. Now, I want to say, just before I subside, because we have a tight timetable, something about anti-Semitism as it now stands. It is, in my opinion, not as bad as it looks. I don't want to make light of this, but it slightly reminds me of Mark Twain's comment on Wagner's music. It's not as bad as it sounds. But those who compare it with Germany, for example, this is not what we're facing. There is absolutely no substantial hostility to Jews as Jews in a Canadian or American society. The overwhelming majority of people would object to any such thing. Approximately 2/3 of Americans are unambiguously in favor of Israel in its current war. What we have is a confected anti-Semitism, and I agree that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in practice are almost always the same thing, but here it's a hostility to Israel, and it arises, I believe, and I put this to you, all of you, from three sources. One is Muslim immigrants who are abusing our hospitality, but they are antagonizing sensible opinion. Nobody likes these people marching around waving Palestinian flags, keeping you late, going to the opera or a baseball game or something. I mean, they're just a damn nuisance, and they have no right to complain about any treatment they've received here. Secondly, is a stunning illustration of the failure of our education system and the vulnerability of faddish sophomores to be misled by pretentious poseurs on the faculty, where they're severely underworked and at immense cost to the country produce a stupefying number of people who are graduates in fields from which they have absolutely no chance to earn a living. What we have now is not the sort of terribly dangerous anti-Semitism of a totalitarian government in one of the most powerful countries in the world, fanatically hostile to the Jewish people. And it is deeply offensive to everyone, in particular the victims of the Third Reich, to have these comparisons with Hitler bandied about and attached to the Jews of all people. I refer to a time when, as Mr. Churchill said, the long night of Nazi barbarism is made more sinister and more protracted by the lights of perverted science. We aren't facing that at all. We are facing an effort by an unrepresentative, by all normal criteria, failed government of Iran to champion anti-Semitism as a method of advancing the apparent imperialist interest of Iran. And it won't work. Iran is very vulnerable. I call your attention to the fact, and I have a great many readers in the United States from the things I write there, so I follow these things closely. And Bibi Netanyahu, when he spoke to the US Congress on September 27, and President Trump in his debate with his opponent on, I believe, October 9, both said that they would not tolerate Iran becoming a nuclear military power. And they won't. And by the way, I don't want to make a partisan statement, but I was very proud of my old friend, Pierre Poilievre, when he said that the destruction of the Iranian nuclear military capability would be a gift to the whole world. And I predict to you that it will happen, and we won't have long to wait for it. The whole world is waiting for the US election, and I'm confident that there will be a change of regime for the better. Finally, I'll just say one word, and it's obvious to you, so I need hardly emphasize it, but on the current conflict. It is scandalous, and you are right to be scandalized, and a great many of your non-co-religionists, but sympathizers, not in a condescending sense, but in a sense of solidarity, are equally outraged that most of our Western governments, including the government of this country, are advocating a so-called ceasefire as if what happened on October 7 of last year was just another skirmish, another border incident. It was an act of war. It was meant to be an act of war. It was received as an act of war and replied to with a de facto declaration of war. And contrary to widespread belief among some of our, I'll resist the temptation to throw in adjectives, some of our media, wars are not conducted by dropping pamphlets and making pompous speeches at the United Nations. And just by illustration, nobody said to Franklin D. Roosevelt a year after Pearl Harbor, "You've killed more Japanese than they killed at Pearl Harbor, stop now." No one said to George W. Bush a year after 9/11, "You've killed more terrorists than they killed at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, stop now." That isn't what happens in wars. You conduct the war until you win. And the ceasefire, the ceasefire that is being advocated by the Biden administration, the Trudeau government, this ludicrous regime that's just come into power in England, unfortunately, succeeding other ludicrous regimes before it, the president of France, who's normally fairly reasonable, and many other Western governments, is a ceasefire which would only be a brief suspension in armed conflict because it consists, among other things, in requiring Israel to withdraw from Gaza, guarantee the lives of the surviving leadership of Hamas, open up the Philadelphia line so we go all through this again, and immense quantities of the sinews of war are illegally, and contrary to what Egypt has pledged to do, shipped back into Gaza to start all over again. It must not happen, and it won't happen. And I would just conclude in this. Remember this. None of the Arab powers, none of them, is supporting Hamas and Hezbollah. They historically have always preferred the Jews to the Persians. And on this one, and it's not every time one can say this, but on this one the Arabs are right. I shall subside now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Black, for those very insightful words that, we have to digest for the rest of the evening and when we go home. Now, we're in a celebratory mood, so I'm going to call on two people who will actually, lead us in some entertainment. They're going to perform from the horror machine. So please, let's put our hands together and welcome Jacob Gorzhaltsan and Kirill Savransky on the keyboard. I think they deserve more. That was so good. I was just closing my eyes and just enjoying it. Now, I know, with everything going on, we kind of need to come together and uplift each other like this. And I do know that the Jewish community is resilient and strong. Amen? Yes. So right now, we're going to play a video of some friends of Rob reflecting on different aspects of him and his life. I'm sure he's nervous right now, wondering what they're going to say. So, yeah, well, let's see. We're going to find out some secrets. So let's watch the video.
Mr. Roberts, on behalf of CAEF, our board, our supporters, and everyone gathered here tonight, I congratulate you on receiving the Advocate Award of Excellence. You will be joining our previous distinguished recipients, including journalist extraordinaire Barbara Kay, outspoken lawyer Brooke Goldstein, and the unrelenting advocate Jacques Gauthier, who've exemplified professional integrity, each in their own way, each in their own field, through these deep cultural turbulent times we live in. Our mission at CAEF is met through education and through advocacy to stem the tide of rising anti-Semitism and especially anti-Zionism. We know to chase out darkness, we need light. To expose lies, we need truths. And you, as editor-in-chief of the National Post, have held true to your mission to produce evidence-based stories through insightful reporting and commentaries in a way that has strengthened our Canadian fiber. So we take this opportunity to thank you. We thank you deeply for the intellectual independence, for the moral clarity and courage that you have brought to our national discourse. And we know and we understand that this is no small feat in these times of spreading and deepening misinformation. So we take this opportunity to thank you and to say, as we do in Hebrew, Yasher Koach, may you have the strength, may you go from strength to strength.
Good evening. My name is Jesse Klein. I'm the Deputy Comment Editor at the National Post. I would like to offer a big congratulations to Rob Roberts for receiving this prestigious honor tonight. Rob recognized immediately following the horrific events of October 7th that this was a story that not only affected the Jewish community in Israel, but also the Jewish community here at home, with rising rates of anti-Semitism in Canada. And he has done his utmost since then, especially to ensure that the newspaper covers stories related to anti-Semitism and the Jewish community, and to ensure that Canadians from coast to coast have the information that they need to know what is happening in the country. So I would like to thank Rob very much for prioritizing this issue and for allowing us in the comment section to do what we do.
Hi, I'm Diane Francis, editor-at-large with the National Post. I'm here to pay tribute to one of my favorite colleagues, and that's Rob Roberts, who runs the National Post and does a very, very terrific job doing so. I've worked in 50 years in this business, and I've dealt with a lot of different editors. And believe me, he rises above the rest. I have dealt with cranky ones, with incompetent ones, with honorary ones, with, all kinds of characters. And Rob is a consummate professional, plus he has the added benefit of not only being a good writer and thinker and editor, but he's a really nice person to deal with. And that is sometimes rare in this world of ours, and not necessarily only in journalism. So I'm very, very proud to work with him. I think he's done a tremendous job with the newspaper, and I think he's a lovely human being as well. So tribute to you, Rob.
I am so proud of my friend Rob Roberts, whom I worked with way back in the late 90s and early 2000s as part of the inaugural editorial crew at the National Post. You know, this was in the early days, long before Rob was being honored as he is today as a righteous Gentile. Back then, I knew him as like a regular, ordinary Gentile. Not unrighteous, per se, but, you know, like if you asked me who in this room is the next Oskar Schindler, I wouldn't have said Rob. But to me, that makes it all the more admirable what Rob has become, because he wasn't born into this. He came to it as a matter of principle, consciously. He decided to step up and help the fight against anti-Semitism and supporting Israel's right to exist. And for that, Rob, you deserve this fine honor, many more years of success, and great work ahead of you. Congratulations.
In an era like this one, when it feels like the world has gone mad, those who promote decency and democracy seem to be few and far between. In the pages of his newspaper, Rob Roberts aspires to provide us with voices who point us in the direction of tolerance and civility. For that, he deserves our thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Lanceman, MP for Thornhill and Deputy Leader of Canada's Conservatives. Rob, I want to congratulate you on being honored tonight by the Foundation. And what's more, I want to say a big thank you for all that you do to promote moral clarity and our Canadian values in journalism. It's never been more important to stand up for justice and freedom, and you do that every single day. Your voice is so valued and so appreciated by so many. A big thanks also to the Foundation for all of the work that you do each and every day. And I'm grateful for strong allies like you and Rob who are helping us fight for a better, brighter, clearer future on the right side of history. Wishing you an amazing evening, and thank you so much, Rob.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Reed. And let me start by thanking the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation and their award ceremony tonight. A very good friend of mine is Rob Roberts, Editor-in-Chief of the National Post. Rob and I have known each other for many years now, and like many Canadians, we found our way and our friendship through hockey. Both of our daughters played together, and we met at the hockey rink. Let me tell you about our first meeting quickly. Parents were gathering for a little dinner before the game, and I happened to be sitting across from Rob and his wife. I was lamenting about our sovereignty in the north and how some of our enemies would be taking advantage of this. And I was saying, where are our press? No one's writing about this. Once I was done, I asked the gentleman sitting across from me, and I introduced myself. Who are you? What do you do? I said, I'm Rob Roberts. I'm Editor-in-Chief of the National Post. So as opposed to railing against me, which he was entitled to do, we started a deep friendship that allowed us to have lots of great discussions on Canadian events, world events, and I gained a great perspective of Rob's balance in this world. Rob's a patriot. He's a patriot on two fronts. First, as a Canadian patriot, the love of this country that Rob has from coast to coast in every town, in every city, in every province, and every territory is deep. Most importantly is he's a patriot to get the story told and to get the story right. Rob's work, I think we've all seen as it relates to anti-Semitism over the last year, has been second to none in our Canadian press. And so with that, Rob, I want to thank you personally for the work you've done on maintaining the integrity and the consistency to get the story out, to get the story right for all Canadians. We're better because of you, and congratulations.
So I've now worked with Rob Roberts and the National Post for many years. You know that you're working with a good organization and a good collaborator. When the answer to the good faith question, do you think you might be interested in this piece, is inevitably yes, that has been precisely my experience working with Rob. This has enabled me to document much that has been happening on the cultural and the political front as well as the rot in the universities that would have otherwise gone unnoticed in Canada and elsewhere, given in particular the pernicious influence of the state media collusion that has somehow now become business as usual in our ailing Canadian polity. In consequence, and while looking forward to continued collaboration far into the future, I'm pleased to congratulate Rob on his receipt of the CAEF award. Long may he continue to cast light into the darker corners of our times.
Rob Roberts has been a beacon of moral clarity in troubling times in the Middle East and on political issues generally. He's been a strong conservative voice in a sea of liberal and illiberal media. He's done me the personal favor of permitting me to deviate from my prescribed columns on employment law to write on my actual passions, particularly in the Middle East. He's invariably been receptive to interesting story ideas on a variety of subjects, letting me be his ears on the ground for exciting events that I happen to encounter, and always quick to write or assign a reporter. What better gift can there ever be to someone in the media? And what better gift can there be to the media than Rob Roberts?
Hey, Rob, I want to congratulate you on being the recipient of this award of excellence this evening. I can't think of a better person, my friend, that the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation could have selected. You have no doubt ensured that Post Media has been reporting with accuracy, with integrity, with honesty about what's happened in Israel on October 7th, what's been happening in Israel since October 7th, and certainly what's been happening in Canada since October 7th. And I also want to thank you quickly for being, without knowing it, the motivational factor for me to start taking missions to Israel with Canadian media. And as a result, the creation of Exigent Foundation, and by the end of this year, we will have taken approximately 20 members of Canadian media to Israel. It was a pleasure being in Israel with you, and I look forward to continue doing these missions for years to come. So Rob, congratulations, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing before October 7th and after October 7th. Congratulations.
Good evening. It's hard to think of a more fitting recognition for Rob Roberts than that of integrity in media. I'm incredibly proud to be associated with a platform in National Post that rejects moral relativism and has the courage to cover the great issues of our time, such as the scourge of anti-Semitism, the right way. All the credit for that leadership goes to Rob and his team. Congratulations to my friend and colleague Rob on an incredibly well-deserved honor.
Okay guys, this is Vivian Berkovich. That's my pomelo tree. I'm in southern Israel on my kibbutz. That's the idyllic side of life here. It's been a very tough year otherwise, as you know. And Rob was here not long ago and got to see for himself. This last week too has been so difficult. But it is people like you, Rob, who really do give us not just hope, but the sustenance we need to carry on and fight this important fight. It's a fight for Israel, it's a fight for Jews, but it's also a fight for the West. I truly believe that. I know that. And you could have sat back and just kind of waited for it all to pass, all of this horrible toxicity, this horribly vicious anti-Semitism, and you didn't. And you gave me and so many others the space to speak out, to fight back, and that is rare and deeply appreciated. I would walk over hot coals for you, Rob Roberts. I don't want to, but I would. And I've had 20 takes of this, and this one's got to go. I'm off to Tel Aviv to yet another event in support of hostages and families. Thank you. Wish I could be there. You're the man.
Rob comes from a long line of truth seekers. Our great-grandfather founded a Montreal newspaper that challenged the provincial government of the day. He uncovered corruption and even criminality. Our grandfather was a war correspondent, an author of Canadian military history books, and in the 70s, he became the voice of English Montreal, challenging the discriminatory language laws of the separatist Lévesque government of the day. Our father, well, he was a radio news director, and I guess that's where he instilled the truth-seeking in our generation. Rob actually started in radio, moved to print, and ultimately to Toronto, where he's worked for the last 20 years or so at the National Post, now, of course, editor-in-chief. And in that role, he went to Israel after October 7th and confided in me that he came back a changed man, vowing to fight anti-Semitism in this country and to stand with Israel. Rob, on behalf of the family, in particular your daughters who flew in to surprise you to be here tonight, I congratulate you. We are very proud of you for getting this honor.
Wow, Rob, that's amazing. Yeah, you can breathe easy now. That was more of a toast than a roast, but I hope you're soaking everything in, because everyone here is here for you. We're here to celebrate you, to say well done, and keep going. So right now, we are going to the most important part of this evening, which, I'm very glad, for us to go into. So the presenter of this award that we're going to be giving to Rob is a woman that herself was honored in 2023 with the award that Rob is going to be getting tonight. She's a dedicated member of the Jewish community who is personally confronting anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred in her regular writing for the National Post and other media. Now, because of the dreadful events of October 7th, 2023, the presentation to Barbara was delayed from November 2023 to February of 2024. And we're thrilled to have, Barbara here today all the way from Montreal. So she's going to be handling this honor. So please put your hands together for Barbara as she comes up. And I will invite Andria to bring us a trophy.
Thank you, Patricia, for that very warm introduction. In this pivotal moment of Jewish history, I really don't think that CAEF could have chosen a more worthy recipient for their 2024 Advocacy Award than Rob Roberts. And so it gives me great pride and personal pleasure to have been given the honor of presenting it to him. I feel very privileged to write for the National Post. Sometimes people tell me my columns about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism take courage to write, and I always respond, because it is true, that it does not take great courage to speak your mind about a controversial subject when your boss has your back. Courage is speaking your mind when your boss doesn't have your back, and when you risk getting canceled but insist on speaking out anyway. We're all familiar with examples of this syndrome in the domains of academia, the health industry, school boards, unions, the arts, and, if you're a fan of Jordan Peterson, professional regulatory bodies. And of course, in journalism as well. Israel has done a great job of nation building, and her enemies have not. But her enemies are brilliant at marketing the big lies that feed their narrative of pure innocence versus pure evil. If propaganda had the literal force of actual weaponry, Israel would be rubble from the river to the sea, and Israeli Jews would all be in the sea. An all too willing media has been the conduit for these big lies, and in a recent column I addressed this phenomenon. No institution, I wrote, has played a more pernicious role in enabling Jewish scapegoatism than Western media. Canadian-Israeli journalist Matti Friedman famously chronicled the mutations in reportage and commentary that reflected a change not in the news, but in the newsroom, when political activism usurped the principle of objectivity in Israel coverage. Media like the BBC and the CBC don't make errors, Friedman says, and sending them corrections on their anti-Israel coverage won't help. Those aren't errors. They're the result of the press doing a different job correctly. The different job he refers to is the perpetuation of the myth that Zionism is inextricably bound up with the human rights evils of our era, racism, apartheid, and colonialism. There is no question in Friedman's mind and in ours that over the last decade, the growing derangement about Israel and the plummeting credibility of the press are related phenomena. This derangement Friedman speaks of is the fruit of a tree poisoned by the debasement of language. As George Orwell said, there is no swifter route to the corruption of thought than through the corruption of language. By this means, rape and baby burning become forms of resistance, and self-defense becomes genocide. Accountable national military units become terrorists, and unaccountable terrorists become freedom fighters. Unchecked, persistent corruption of language transmutes hateful thought and action into righteousness and social justice in the eyes of a credulous public. The loss of consensus around the meaning of words is a particular frustration for Jews who have historically been forbidden to defend themselves except through words. When passionate but unreliable narrative is privileged over facts and precision of language in almost all the mainstream media, we feel disarmed and vulnerable. And so, those influencers in the media who beat against this irrational current, remaining faithful to traditional professional standards in their stance on both Israel and virulent anti-Semitism, are heroes to us. And there's precious few of them. In Canada, Rob has proven himself to be first among equals in that category, and it delights us to honor him. That phrase, delights to honor, recalls to my mind the biblical book of Esther, which is unfortunately relevant to the events of the last year. The book of Esther is a fictional tale about a Jewish community in Susa, the capital city of the ancient Persian Empire. The story concerns a narrowly averted genocide at the hands of a man called Haman. In prototype, a Hitler figure with great influence at the court of Persia's benevolent but naive king. Mordecai, the book's protagonist, exposes Haman's plot to kill all of Persia's Jews. He reveals it to the king. The king is horrified by Haman's evil plan. As a punishment, the king orders Haman to see that Mordecai is dressed in fine robes and mounted on a beautiful horse, and then led by Haman himself through the city streets, forced to proclaim, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." I personally thought it would be very nice if Rob were put into fine robes and sat on a horse, and that the head of the CBC would have to lead him around the city. I thought that would have been quite fitting, but CAEF wasn't sure that Rob would appreciate having to wear the fine robes. A horse was deemed impractical, and in any case, CAEF is not the king. So they settled on the 21st century equivalent, an attractively inscribed lucite statuette. A small token of our community's deep appreciation for Rob's personal integrity and principled editorial leadership in a very dark hour for Israel and the Jewish people. And now, Rob, you can come up and collect your award, which is, oh, thank you.
Thank you.
There you go.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Would you like? Yes, yes, that's right. I'll take it
now,
down.
I guess, eh?
Yes, you are.
I wasn't nervous till you all stood up for me. Thank you to the bottom of my heart. It's lovely to meet all of you out there, and lovely to have nice people say nice things about me for a change. So a few months ago, I went to see a rabbi. I wanted some advice. At the Post, we want to get this historic moment right. We have tried very hard to get it right. Since that awful morning a year ago, I'd make the case that our news coverage has been fair and balanced, by which I mean unbiased against Israel. I'll talk later as to why that can be so hard to do in the world we live in today. Our commentary, meanwhile, has been relentless in its support for the Jewish state and in support of Canadian Jewry as they have grown increasingly unsettled. But how do others see it? So I asked the rabbi, what does your congregation need from the Post? He told me, we want to hear from non-Jews. Journalists are usually urged to try to find voices from the communities being reported on, so his advice surprised me. But I think I got the rabbi's point eventually. Jewish Canadians need to hear our support. They also need us to understand that we're all involved here. So let me say this. This award honors Andrew McLeod, our CEO, and Duncan Clark, our Chief Content Officer. And it honors Carson Jarama, the Post's managing editor, for comment, and Aline Donnelly, the managing editor for news. It honors Michael Higgins and Sabrina Mado and Rahim Mohammed, and I could go on. And it honors the columns of Rahil Raza, who I'm delighted to see doing so well. It also, of course, honors Barbara Kay. So I guess that means she's been honored 2 years in a row. Rightfully. And it honors Jesse Klein and Avi Ben Lolo and Vivian Berkovich and others. And it honors Lord Conrad Black, who founded the Post to be what it is 26 years ago this month. We are 2 months younger than Google. It also honors Rex Murphy. I want to talk about Rex a little bit. He was very sick for more than a year before he died in May, but he dragged himself to Ottawa for the pro-Israel rally there in December 2023. Rex had some things he wanted to say. And then in May, he did something extraordinary. Only a few days from dying, he wrote this for us about Hamas's horrors. I'm going to quote at length here, and there's some harsh words here, but I think they speak to what Rex wanted to say. I'm quoting. Without warning, at a music festival, chased, toyed with, beating every Jew they could find, hunted them down, tormented them, raped them, shot them, a great insensate, orgiastic jubilation over a massacre of innocent Jews of an intensity and enormity not seen since the demonic practices of Jew-hating, Jew-destroying Nazism. The greatest puncture in that useless lying balloon of never again, since that failed slogan was first muttered. Jews massacred in their homeland, Jews killed again. This is still Rex. Hamas is in a squalid tradition, There's a lot of Himmler in Hamas. There was also the deep cruelty, the sadism of taking hostages, ripping families asunder if they did not kill them, scooping up babies, young children, keeping a special eye out for pretty girls, dragging over 250 innocent people of all ages to Hamas's web of dirt tunnels. How could a man look into the eyes of a 9-month-old infant and sunder him or her from parents? How could men rape and beat so many female hostages? When Rex filed that column, I had no idea he was perhaps 36 hours from succumbing to his various ills. His last email to me was, "Did the piece make the online edition?" What he meant was, did the maximum number of people hear him defend the righteousness of Israel? Rex was a very good friend of Israel, and this award honors him. I want to thank Andria Spindel and Judith Benatar and Anita Bromberg and everyone else with the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation for honoring the National Post in this remarkable way. I also want to acknowledge Adrian Batra and Brian Lilly and others from our Post media siblings, Warren Kinsella, the Toronto Sun. I went with them to Israel in January with my friend Larry Mayer, and I don't need to tell you the good work they're doing. He's not here tonight. He lives in Calgary, but I also want to thank Kevin Libin, Post Media's executive editor of politics, who's been an important mentor, and not just on Israel. If you'll indulge me briefly, though, I also want to say how moved I am to be the named recipient tonight, even if it's very much a group honor, because this is personal to me. I'm a Montreal Anglo, and so that means I've always felt a little Jewish adjacent. English Montreal is a small community and disproportionately Jewish. It always felt like one community to me, especially as the provincial government restricted all our rights as Anglos. I went to the same high school as Leonard Cohen, a couple decades on. I had the brief pleasure of being Mordecai Richler's editor at the Montreal Gazette. I didn't change a single word. Are there any Montrealers here? All right. My first job in journalism was hawking the Sunday Express outside the Brown Derby on Van Horn. If you know, you know. When I skipped classes in high school, you could often find me at Ben's. More importantly, like many Canadians, we have Jewish family. My brother Leslie and sister Kathy, who are both here tonight, have had Jewish partners and kept kosher for a time. Many of you will know my brother from television, and I can tell you from my texts that Israel has no bigger supporter. We have other Jewish relations via marriage as well. Also here tonight are my wife Charlene and our 3 amazing daughters, Aislinn, Fiona, and Kate. Fiona, who is our oldest, is engaged to a Jewish guy and is converting, and we expect to be blessed soon enough with Jewish grandchildren. Got that? Okay? All right. But let me read a text Ben sent Fiona on October 6th, 10 days ago, which they've allowed me to share here. I quote, "You should be careful out and about tomorrow. It's a good day not to be out in public or at any Jewish spaces." Many people here tonight will have had similar conversations, but this is a new one for me. I grew up in a world where I heard about anti-Semitism, but never really saw it myself. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have said the world had evolved in the right direction. I'd give you a different answer today. In 2022, the last Gaza conflict, I was struck by how alone the Jews I knew felt, especially those on the left of the political spectrum. The world has been turning its back on Israel, and honestly, it's heartbreaking. Infuriating, but heartbreaking. We made a conscious decision in 2022 at the Post, diving deeper on the pro-Israel template Lord Black and our founding editor Ken White set. We'd be a safe harbor for the Jewish community. Our commentary would wave the flag with special enthusiasm. I hope we succeeded at that. In the days after October 7th, we realized there were two stories to tell: what Hamas had done in Israel and what their allies were doing here in Canada. Our focus on defending Israel is because we support a free, liberal democracy that pursues justice and peace. Our focus on standing up against anti-Semitism is because Jews are undeserving targets of hatred. Standing against anti-Semitism is the same as standing up against racism or any other discrimination. But from where I sit, other media seem to have a blind spot on that. We resolved to shine a light on anti-Semitism anywhere we found it. We couldn't keep up. It's a full-time job and then some. So we cover what we can. The shooting at the Jewish girls' school not far from here on Saturday morning, for example, but then address the trends as best we can in our commentary. Our news coverage of the war is a more complicated story. We have some great freelancers in Israel who have told the stories of October 7th and of the hostages and of the displaced residents of northern Israel and more. But for the day-to-day, we have to rely on wires, and we can't always trust them to get it right. We know how the Associated Press and almost everyone else flubbed the October 17th hospital bombing. They took Hamas's word about blame and casualties. There are other specific examples of them writing first, based on what Hamas tells them, and seeking the whole story later. But the biggest concerns may just be the words they choose and the context they choose to include. They write about calls for a ceasefire without noting there was one in place on October 6th. I should note AP later did a thorough investigation of Palestinian deaths in Gaza and found that Hamas's health ministry had exaggerated them, and they reported that. So it's not all bad, just so much of it is. So we carefully vet every Mideast story, wire story that we run. Depending on the source, they can often be accurate, but be far from conveying the whole truth. We also guard for misinformation. And this gets us to the theme of tonight's event: trust in the news. Every news outlet makes mistakes. We do. I'd caution against assuming every mistake stems from an agenda. News outlets are more thinly staffed than they used to be, and journalists and editors can be overworked. But look for the assumptions behind the news stories. A very long time ago, well before I worked for him, Lord Black called Canadian journalists lazy. It made me angry. I was working pretty hard. But in the decades since, I have come to understand what I think he meant. He meant incurious, intellectually lazy, not probing conventional wisdom. And the problem has only become far worse. Our journalists are better educated than they've ever been, but they're coming out of journalism schools as activists. Many have a worldview that marginalizes Israel, and they never question these assumptions, and some no longer even attempt to be impartial. No wonder the news coverage is so often so bad. Journalists used to stick up for the little guy. Now, many can't see who the little guy is. Israel may have more tanks than Hamas, but there's much more complicated math at play. We've been increasingly looking outside the J School universe in our hiring, although I do want to say we have some excellent J School grads working for us. But many people have just stopped reading. They're seeking out alternative sources that aren't always trustworthy. At Post Media, we see trust as our competitive advantage. The Post fact checks and double checks. Trust is a work in progress, and we take it very seriously. When we do make mistakes, we correct them. We focus on things that matter to our readers, which goes beyond Israel, obviously. If you read our commentary, you know we believe that Iran, China, and Russia are using our freedoms against us. We shine a light where it needs to shine, on Taiwan, Hong Kong, certainly on Ukraine, and on the emerging alliance against Western values. We stand up for those values. At home, we're in favor of smaller government, lower taxes, and the promise of capitalism, even if sometimes capitalism has some excesses. You may disagree with our worldview, and that's fine. Everyone is better off if they read widely and decide for themselves. Everyone is better off if they read things they disagree with. I've changed my mind on many things over the years. Now, bear with me for a moment, because I've got a pitch to make. I know we're all being asked for money all the time. I'm a journalist, not a business guy, but permit me to step outside my comfort zone. If you do read the Post and you like it, I have a humble request. Subscribe. We need subscribers. I'm very optimistic about our company. We're finding new sources of revenue. We have a strong editorial plan that's working. Our audience is larger than it's ever been. But we need to better monetize that audience. So please tell your friends to subscribe. If you own a business, buy bulk subscriptions. Again, we're already successful at this. Our subscriptions were up by about 25% last year. But we need more. To be clear, I don't mean that you need to get the paper delivered, although that would be nice. A weekly digital subscription last week was less than $1. $1 is worth it. Trust me. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much. Am I going to go over there? Let me just grab my water. Thank you. Okay. This way.
Yeah, congratulations, Rob, for a well-deserved honor. And may you continue to grow from strength to strength. And have a tough spine. I know you've seen a lot of, virtual and verbal threats and harassment, but, keep doing what you're doing. As you said, I really love what you said about, the truth. Learn it for yourself. And also read things you disagree with sometimes, because you just may change your mind. Yeah, thanks for doing what you're doing, and congratulations. I'll ask you to have a seat. And we're going into the final part of this program, which is a part I'm looking forward to. It's an interview with Robert. And to anchor this, we're going to invite Neil Seeman, a former National Post Board member, author, educator, essayist, serial entrepreneur, lawyer, poet, public health researcher, a mental health advocate, publisher, CEO of Sullivan House, and expert. Wow, what don't you do? What don't you do, Neil? Please put your hands together for Neil. So, over to you, Neil.
Thank you. This has been an extraordinary night, have no doubt. We're all going to remember this. So one thing that you may not know about Rob is he's a bloody hard worker. Really, really hard worker. And I want to ask you about that, Rob. When did you, and what was the spark for you to dive into journalism, knowing it was your calling?
My brother talked about this. My family has been full of journalists for generations. Les talked about our great-grandfather. He was actually put in jail for telling the truth about the Quebec government, the National Assembly. The National Assembly created a law basically to shut him up. And they put him in the dungeon or whatever, the basement of the National Assembly in Quebec City for 3 or 4 months. It was front page news. He was on the front page of the Toronto Star when somebody delivered a Christmas cake to him when he spent Christmas in jail or in the basement. Our grandfather, our father, uncle, now my niece, are journalists. My daughter Aislinn, who's here, is also interested in journalism after she graduated high school. It started for me when my dad convinced me, literally, to quit high school. He ran a newsroom in New Brunswick. We'd moved to New Brunswick for reasons I can't defend, from Montreal. I was 16 or 17 years old, And he's running a radio newsroom, and he said, you could tell I was having a good time in high school. So he said, come work for me for free. So I did. And I worked for him for a year for free. It was a really interesting era. It was the era of Brian Mulrooney and John Turner and like leadership races and all that. And I was a 17-year-old guy interviewing the Prime Minister. And that was pretty cool. And then he and my mother was from Cornwall, Ontario. And so she understood the bleakness of small towns. And so they left Moncton, New Brunswick, and I stayed behind. His successor hired me on at poverty wages. And I stuck around for a couple of years and then worked hard and, moved along to better jobs and such things. The one thing I want to say about my dad is he taught me two things. He taught us two things. One, resist conventional wisdom. And I can imagine a father giving a few pieces of better advice than that. Think for yourself. And he taught me to always assume the listener is about to turn their radio off. You got to keep them there. And those are both pretty good lessons.
Rob, do you remember where you were on October 7th and maybe a little more deeper on this, how the reactions in Canada to what was going on affected your decision around editorial coverage of the war?
For sure. It was Thanksgiving Saturday. I was on my sister's couch in Ottawa. We'd gone up there, our family gone up there to be with her and her family. And I'm looking at Twitter, and I'm starting to see some of the body cam footage from Hamas, and then of course more of it. And I spent much of that weekend on the telephone. I remember talking to Barb and to Vivian and others to get the kind of commentary that we needed to get for a day of that unfathomability. It was very clear, surprisingly early, the world had changed. It took a while to understand the full horrors of it. I remember still a couple of days later, we were still learning things about what had happened at Nova. And there was, anyway, October 7th kind of radicalized me, to be honest with you. Rationalized me? Yeah, I like that, actually. It's good. You're right. You know what? It gave me clear eyes. Cover your ears, Lord Black. I'm actually not that conservative a guy. I'm a small L liberal. Sorry. But I understand the world in a way I didn't before, and so every meeting that we have, we are guided by those clear eyes and trying to resist conventional wisdom.
That's great. At the founding of the National Post, I was on the editorial board, household names, colleagues, and we all, we kind of had this informal motto where we thought we were sort of standing up to bullies. And I'm wondering, when I look at the Post today, it seems like you guys are standing up to bullies actually more forcefully than we did. And first of all, I guess, do you agree with that characterization? And secondly, hey, do you, how do you marshal the troops?
First of all, the bullies are getting worse. That's part of it, right? The room that many elites want to give you to speak about things is very narrow. And so it's more work. But being different from other mainstream media is our raison d'etre. The world doesn't need another Globe and Mail, even though I have friend here, Catherine from the Globe and Mail, is doing some excellent work. But the Globe and Mail is very good at what it does. We don't want to be the Globe and Mail. We don't want to be the Toronto Star. We don't want to be the CBC. We've changed public opinion on several issues in the years I've been in this job, as we had years before that. But more importantly, we created a safe place to have discussions. That's pretty rare these days in mainstream news, and it's pretty seductive, to be honest with you. And to answer your question, the team thrives on it. And you saw Jesse Klein. Yeah. Like, Jesse loves to screw with people. And he's not the only guy. Barb loves to screw with people. And the team really thrives on this stuff. It's the point.
You know, I mean, when it comes to bullies, right, certain of the bullies you're taking on, UN agencies, university administrations, it comes with some risk. You know, who knows? Institutional risk, personal risk, arguably. Was there ever a time after October 7th of last year where you felt, hey, maybe I'm taking a risk too far?
No.
Okay.
I'd say this. This is where trust matters. If we're going to go out on limbs, we need to be bulletproof. But there are others, UN Watch, who blaze the trail at the UN. For example, I'll admit that I didn't fully understand the dynamics of the UN until I met some very smart people in Israel with Larry, who'd worked on the UNRWA files for years. And then once I heard about it, of course, it all seems so obvious, doesn't it now? I would argue that the university leadership made their own beds. They're discovering now, to me, the price of indulging certain kinds of activism. They thought it was harmless. You know, Israel Apartheid Week will lead to nothing. And I think we know better now. I'm a free speech guy, but when so much activism is embraced so fully by university officials and fomented by those university officials, the idea of taking over public space and banning Zionists becomes easy. And we saw what happened.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. You know, one thing you said in your speech, we didn't talk about this. You mentioned people, Jews on the left of the political spectrum, and how they feel alone. Something I've observed too. I mean, how do you speak to them?
I've tried to reach out to a number of activists on the left who are supportive of Israel. Joe Roberts, who is really good on this issue, who's written for us a bunch of times. I've tried to talk Jesse Brown, who is a critic and antagonist of the National Post, but has gone so far out on the limb for what he believes in on Israel and about anti-Semitism in Canada, at great risk to the company he owns. Jesse's a wealthy guy at this point. He's made a lot of money with Canada Land. And everybody who works for him is young and believes things that many young people do. And he has faced down his own staff. He wouldn't write for us because he sees this as a competitor. He appreciated the offer. But I do think it's important to speak to that cohort, the Jewish left, and we've written a bunch of stories, and we've tried very hard to reflect, you know, the pain that they're going through, frankly, because they are alone. All the people, you know, their fellow travelers, the people they trusted, and they hung out with, and they had pizza with, and shared beers and talked politics with, have turned on them, and they've lost friends, and that's hard.
I should say, by the way, your one-word answer speaks for itself as to why you deserve this award tonight. So, you know, fringe opinions. There was sort of like 30 years ago, just things that were outside of the acceptable realm of debate, far outside the fringe. The idea that Israel is a colonizer state was just so outrageous. And yet now it populates editorial and major media, and it seeps into the news coverage elsewhere. How did that happen?
This is just my opinion. There's an anti-West ideology that now pervades academia and institutions and newsrooms. It views the world through a very narrow and distorting lens. We could have a whole other conversation about that, but do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I still remember the days. I mean, we Conrad, you don't know this story, but there were a bunch of us. We actually tried to. There was a gentleman named Justice Wiener who investigated the roots of Edward Said's origins, and there were about 30 journalists around the world, liberals predominantly, and we couldn't get him on record. Anyway, and then we got a really nasty note. Letter to the editor that we didn't publish. We should have published, but I don't know the answer either. I don't, Rob. So on that point, like coming to the theme of tonight, like what does integrity in journalism mean to you?
Balance. Our goal is not to skew news stories in favor of Israel or whatever, but to ensure these stories are not skewered against Israel. We are institutionally pro-choice. We're a libertarian paper, more or less, but we don't sideline the opinions of people who are anti-abortion. I could name a bunch more examples. One thing I want to say, this goes back to the trust. Our managing editor, Carson Jerem, has a rigorous fact-checking apparatus. It slows us down, I'll be honest with you. But news shouldn't be fast if it's not ready, and commentary shouldn't be fast. So, we're bulletproof, and that's integrity.
Just on that point, right? The other challenge we've got, and people observe this in the media today, is we don't have long-form journalism, investigations to hold institutions to account. People are concerned about the business model of journalism to be able to afford that. I mean, how does the Post envision the solution to that?
I'm glad you asked. This is a big part of the strategy I was talking about earlier that I think is really working for us. I mean, I'm talking about obviously just the Post here. Obviously, other media are doing their own version of things. We have a very specific strategy around long reads. There is something remarkable about being able to write 6,000 words about a topic. The average news story is about 700 words. 6,000 words is a lot. It provides a depth that is rare. This is a choice we've made. I'll give you an example. For the anniversary of October 7th this month, we planned 2 long reads, both over that length. We profiled former hostage Aviva Siegel in Israel and Tel Aviv. Our reporter spent hours with her, bringing out the small details about life in the Hamas tunnels and life after. And her husband is still in Hamas's custody. And we talked about that, and she talked about what the young woman she was with, what she knew about them, with a certain care, obviously. You can't do that in 700 words. We also did a deep dive on how the Jewish community in Canada is feeling. We spoke to 12 people at length with varying viewpoints, and some, including some who were planning to leave Canada because of the atmosphere that's been created here. Again, you can't do that in 700 words.
So, all the extraordinary things you're doing at the Post, I mean, they all depend on the, getting that audience. So, the elephant in the room that a lot of us think about is young people. We hear, the data suggests they're getting their news from Reddit or worse, dare I say it, TikTok, entertainment. How do you reach them? What's the strategy for reaching them?
You meet them where they are. I'm not sure the National Post specifically is going to meet them where they are. Although if you do subscribe and you leave it on your dining room table, they might pick it up. But obviously, there are lots of influencers who have far more clout with those young people than we do. I saw a lot of videos in the early days of this of diverse Israelis looking very cool and attractive and giving the lie to the settler myth, the European settler myth. I know many young Jews and other allies of Israel are uncomfortable with taking on the responsibility of going against, the popular viewpoint on social media and among their friend groups to speak up. It's easy for me to give this advice. I don't have to do that, but I think it's what's necessary. Bad ideas take root, and they take root because nobody challenges them. It's a lot to ask of a 16-year-old to take that on, and I'm not asking 16-year-olds to take that on, but I'm not sure this is exactly the same thing, but many of you may have seen a video Bill Maher did, an excellent explainer on a show the other day, in which he addressed a pop star, Chapel Roan, who had been critical of Israel. He didn't hector her, not much. He praised her music. He took her seriously, and then, hopefully having not alienated her fans, he explained the true dynamics of Israel's wars. And anyone who came across that on social media may have had their mind changed, or at the very least, opened. Maybe they'll Google, maybe they'll look around. And that's why an open space for debate anywhere is what you need.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I remember you and I were talking. It's actually, if you measure it, the diversity of opinion within the Post is actually larger than elsewhere in other major media. So looking toward the future, Rob, what concerns you the most about the future of journalism in Canada? And at the same time, what's your reason for hope, optimism?
The biggest challenge is that a lot of the business models for these startups depend on a worldview, a political worldview, either the left or the right. And it isn't just color the commentary and the way it does ours. Our worldview is pretty skewed in one direction too, in our commentary, and that's a decision we made. But it colors their news coverage as well. And so you don't know how much of the story you're getting. And, it's hard to know how all this will play out. What's the news landscape look like from 10 years from now? But if your business model is that, relentless left or relentless right is what's going to snag you subscriptions, guess what you're going to do? The world needs centrist outlets. As for hope, I got lots. I'm an optimist. Humans are largely good. We've had worse moments than this.
One of the things that impresses me about the coverage of Israel in the war is, to borrow a word from progressives, is context and the historical context that you layer into so many of the stories. It's no doubt hard to do and fact check, but that gives me a bit of an optimism too, right? I mean, your it's hard, but you're educating people about the past. A lot of young people don't have a connection to war in particular. I think both of us have people in our family who have been affected by war. Thought about that?
We've been very lucky for a long time. I'm mid-50s. Okay, late 50s. You know, we've never known, you know, we've known war and we saw things, but the world feels far more dangerous now than it did when we were younger. You know, I grew up in the 70s and early 80s, and the Holocaust was only 30 years back, right? That colored my worldview, you know. Yeah, so I yeah.
Rob, I just on a personal level, I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody here too for coming out. I mean, I really do believe just the physical ability to be together. This is a story of connectivity. I still remember the first time Conrad Black used the word lazy. I actually remember it as pusillanimous. And then I looked it up. And we're here because of him and you. Thank you, Rob. It's a real honor to be with you on stage tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Neil and Rob, for your thoughtful, insightful, engaging conversation tonight on the integrity of journalism and the media. Your words have reminded us all of the critical role that journalism plays in upholding truth and accountability. We cannot overstate, you know, the value of integrity, balance, and courage in the media in a world where misinformation and biased reporting can spread so easily and so quickly. Now, you've heard all, you know, how Israel's tragedy has influenced Rob and how this learning experience brought him to understand the Jewish pain of anti-Semitism, to report on it without whitewashing history or representing two sides, as though they're equal when only one side is battling righteously for democracy, freedom, and true security, and that is Israel. I'm thrilled to announce that tonight's second goal has been achieved. So CAEF has raised funds to enable the organization to sponsor one and maybe two journalists to travel to Israel to bear witness, to learn the truth on the ground, and to understand both existential and military threats firsthand. So CAEF will offer and support these journalists to have, you know, from allied communities who value this as experiential learning and much more, you know, information that they can report to their different factors. Now, I'd like us to watch for more news from CAEF because they'll continue to share more information. And a special thank you to all the sponsors for tonight's event. Please put your hands together for the sponsors. And to all of you for being here and for engaging in this very crucial conversation, which sometimes we run away from, but we have to have these very difficult conversations. Now, if you've not already subscribed or you're not a reader of the National Post, I'm sure with this few words Rob has convinced you. So please subscribe. And I'd like to say that, you know, there's a postcard that I can use to subscribe in the program. If you didn't have one, you can ask one of the ushers to give you that. So finally, I'd like to invite back Anita Bromberg. Thank you so much for having me. I had a wonderful time and I learned a lot, and I wish you all the best.
Okay, just dessert awaits, and I'm sure you're all anxious to shake hands with our wonderful presenters tonight. And first and foremost, I want to thank our MC with a small little presentation of our thanks. Wasn't she wonderful? And now I think you all agree that this was a wonderful evening, and it's due to the enormous efforts of our committee. So would Carrie Katz, Rose Baum, Judith Benatar, and Andria Spindel please come up for one moment and accept these flowers? And one more person, Barbara Kay, please. Thank you for all the work you've done for us. And I think with that, outside there's dessert and refreshments, and thank you all for supporting this important evening. Thank you to Rob Roberts and his wonderful family, and may we have a peaceful, prosperous year.